I love it. Panama, Sweden, Ithaca, Mexico, Colombia, Germany, Guatemala, Ithaca, Hawaii, Germany, Colombia, China, Denmark, Vermont. Oh, this is great. This is
All right.
great.
Well, welcome everybody. I think we're going to get started because we've got a tight schedule as usual. So, hi everybody. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the 5th session of the Science Visualization Workshop series. And today's topic is creating a logo. And let's switch the slide here. Okay. My name is Joanna Konopka, and I'm a postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Neuroscience at Johns Hopkins University. And Daria Task is a postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Biology, also at Johns Hopkins. And together, we are the organizers and moderators of this workshop series. The partners for this series include Project Bridge and Doctoral Life Design Studio at Johns Hopkins University. And our generous sponsors are Kavli Neuroscience Discovery Institute and the Department of Neuroscience at Johns Hopkins University. So we would like to acknowledge and thank all our partners and sponsors for making this event possible.
I am so thrilled to have everybody back. And for those who are returnees in this series of workshops, this is a really special one because my dear friend, colleague, Amy Zheng has come to join us and give like a bona fide workshop. So we're going to walk through and really produce our very own logos, which I'm thrilled about. And again, I want to give deep thanks to those orchestrating the whole event, Joanna and Daria. Without them, this would not be at all possible because I can't do that kind of stuff. So what I'll do is I'll share my screen. But first, since it's always nice to see actual human beings, even if they're in the ether, I want to quickly introduce Amy, who will give a broader introduction to herself a little bit later.
That's it. Well, again, I just want to reiterate, thank you to all the organizers. Thanks, Barrett, for inviting me, and thanks to all of you for attending today. I think it's going to be a great time. And as Barrett said, I will give a bit more of an introduction a little bit later before we begin our logo work. So Barrett, why don't you take us away?
I will. I'm an entomology professor at University of Wisconsin-La Crosse. I study sleep in insects, and I'm interested in the intersection of science and art and cultural entomology. Okay, logos. We're inundated with them, these weird little iconic symbols that represent people or corporations. What I want to do is guide us through logos that can be effective or somewhat ineffective. So if we look at this from 2012, this was the Olympic logo, and many bashed this logo because if I hadn't said 2012, might have taken you, some of you, some minutes to figure out what's going on here with this wacky logo. Now, some logos can be unintentionally suggestive. And who on earth would go to this violent dentist, for example? Unintended consequences from this symbol representing, well, a dastardly dentist. Now, I'm about to present my least favorite logo ever produced on Earth, and it's not because the design itself is bad. It's because of the implications. Cover the Earth with bloody red paint? They need to rethink this. Okay, here's another suggestive one, unintentional, I hope. And you'll find a number of designers online like to re-envision what they see as failed logos. And here's a site where one designer has done so with this Institute for Oriental Studies. Now, since this is a visualizing science series, I wanted to bring one example home, and that has to do with the American Genetic Association. And a colleague of mine, Sierra Colavito, noticed that there's something awry, amiss, and amuck with the AGA logo. Now, if I bring up the Nobel Prize winning vision of the most important molecule, not only of the century, but of all of history, deoxyribonucleic acid, here it is. from our 1953 paper. Can anyone in the chat tell me, alert to me why this important organism? Yes! Thank you. Oh, yeah. So Andrea already notes, oh no, the helix is spiraling the wrong way. And sure enough, if I flip it, if I turn it, you'll see the left versus the right helical direction. Now, this should be mortifying for all people involved at the highest levels of the American Genetic Association. They need to rebrand. Now, that's not always an easy thing. Pepsi did this somewhat recently, and it cost them $1.2 billion to do so. Okay, let's move on. So what makes for graphical excellence within the realm of logos? And for many of you, you'll recognize that the specific terms I'm using, graphical excellence, because I'm following Edward Tufte, the guru of visualization, from his first major publication on the topic, The Visual Display of Quantitative Information, first published in 1983. And he listed principles of graphical excellence in the following order. 1, graphical excellence is the well-designed presentation of interesting data, a matter of substance, of statistics, of design. 2nd, graphical excellence consists of complex ideas communicated with clarity, precision, and efficiency. Now, those who have heard me before will know that my favorite is this third one. Graphical excellence is that which gives to the viewer the greatest number of ideas in the shortest time with the least ink in the smallest space. So there's that person with ideas floating above his head, time's involved, and ink is in that on that canvas. But he has 2 more. Graphical excellence is nearly always multivariate, more than one variable is involved. And some of you will remember his favorite graphic that has 6 layers of information: Napoleon Army march on Moscow and retreat. And finally, graphical excellence requires telling the truth about the data. So in visualizing science, 3 of our goals, probably in order of importance, is accuracy, clarity, and then aesthetics, an engaging image that will draw us in and keep us there. So if we look at these factors, we could wonder, okay, which are most relevant to creating a logo? Now, here's your first test. I'd like everyone to pull out a little sheet of paper and actually physically write down in front of them a list of terms, and they could be single words, that you see as essential criteria for a logo. I'm going to do it myself, even though I created the list. I want to see how close I come to my own list. Do you want to load up some of your thoughts in the chat? Let's see what you came up with. Simple, good. Simplicity is key. Clarity, readability, relevance, recognizable, feeling, balanced, assertiveness, emotion, fast to read, vibrant, neat, memorable, reducible, culturally appropriate, that is essential, visually appealing, scalable. Oh, I'm so glad someone said scalable. Vivid, color. Oh, interesting. Saying color is important. Is it really essential? We'll talk about that too. Creative, distinctive, attractive, versatile. Versatile is important, especially in conjunction with scalability. Is it memorable? Is it relevant? Is it imaginative? These are all great. So I'm going to move on and share, well, many people have thought about logos, obviously. And one of those is the famous Todd Klein, no relation to me, who produces all that lettering famously for so many comic books, including logos, in this case for Doctor Strange. And everybody knew Doctor Strange was going to appear in this workshop on logos. So he had his Elements of Comics logo design criteria, and I highlight them in the upper left, with readability, which many of you had in various forms written down, strength, now this may be appropriate for comic books, bold lines, energetic, action-filled, dynamic. Appropriateness, some of you talked about not just relevance, but cultural relevance. And originality, it better be unique, right? Here was my working list, and I really liked your running list. So unique, it better be novel, better be simple. We better be able to walk away and remember that logo, better stick in your mind like an earworm. And then describable, can you describe it? Is it eye-catching? Is it relevant to whatever you're trying to represent symbolically? Is it effective without color? And think about those who are colorblind, as well as having a versatile logo that could be black and white or monochromatic. And as some of you suggested, scalability could be important. Does the same logo or a variant on a logo appear on a business card or a billboard? Okay, I'm going to share some logos, and we can look at some ancient ones. Here's one of my favorite artists, Albrecht Dürer, and his etching. And if you look in the lower left, there is his little Albrecht Dürer symbol. Ba-doo! Recognizable, simple, scalable. I think it has all the qualities of a good logo. James Abbott McNeill Whistler with his arrangement in gray and black, or Whistler's mother. If you look on that curtain just to the left of the picture she has on the wall, he has a butterfly. And sure enough, it wasn't exactly the same from image to image, book to book, canvas to canvas, but they were all recognizable as a Whistler butterfly. Now we can go to a more modern one. The next one I'll share, 100% of the attendees in the audience know this logo. And that's impressive, right? Now, the first iteration, I wouldn't say that would be as successful. Anybody know what that's supposed to depict in 1976? Oh, it says Isaac Newton and an apple about to fall on his head, right? So that's a complicated logo. So very quickly, within the year, the famous iconic rainbow apple. And the reason why it has a bite out of it, according to the person who designed that logo in an interview, is to distinguish it from a cherry tomato. And you notice how it became monochromatic later. And then, of course, Google's logo. It's so recognizable that now you can have Google Doodles, including celebrating special events like the anniversary of the discovery of X-rays by Röntgen. And you see that slight motion, that shimmering, the X-ray quality of looking at the bones. And again, since we're looking at visualizing science, I'm going to share a few that I think are relatively successful and related at least tangentially to biology. And pointing out this one in the lower right, isn't it interesting, this economic use of space to maximize the visuals of a diversity of vertebrates? And I'll share two of my students' logos in my scientific visualization class in Wisconsin. I thought this was a clever one with his last name's first letter combined with a longhorn beetle, a cerambycid, which he loves. And the next one is a stunning, memorable one by Liz Oldenburg, who does ceramics. Okay, now I'm going to turn it over to Amy.
All right, thank you, Barrett, for that introduction. So to briefly introduce myself, my name is Amy. I'm currently a PhD candidate at the Rachel Carson Center for Environment and Society in Munich. I study how children in different cultures learn relationships with the non-human world. But I've kind of gotten there by taking a pretty windy route following many of my different interests. I'd studied art and biology and ecology in my undergrad and actually worked for Barrett as an intern, perhaps a decade ago, which is how we met. And I've also done a lot so I've done art, design, animation, animal cognition, anthropology now. So I make artwork, I do illustrations and design, and I'm currently working on a collaborative anthropology comic book. Go ahead and advance the slide, Barrett. And so these are some of the logos that I have designed. And most of them have been for science or science adjacent organizations. So the one on the far left is for the Diverse Intelligences Summer Institute, a very cool summer school. The initial design was actually by Hilda Lowry, and then I was the one who implemented that design. The logo in the center is for an animal cognition lab at University of Auckland that I briefly worked for, and it includes the three kind of key species the lab works with. So they work with dogs, they work with Kia, which are very cool parrots, and they work with New Caledonian crows. And so it's sort of important for me to have that specificity in the logo as well. And then this last logo is for an organization called Editing Nature that looks at how we make decisions about using gene editing in the wild for conservation purposes. And so it's a more subtle logo that has a bit of that like DNA pattern in it, as well as this image of the tree. And so what we're going to be doing today is I'm going to be taking you guys through an abbreviated, a condensed version of my design process for coming up with these logos. So before we get into that, can we trigger the first pop poll and ask people what kind of logo they'd be interested in designing today?
Yeah, and you have a choice. Would you choose a personal logo that represents you on a personal side, a professional you logo, or a logo for someone else?
And that can be another person if you're thinking about gifting them a logo. It could be a company, it could be a client. Where does that poll pop up, Barrett?
I am trying to activate it right now.
All right, thank you, Daria. So while that poll goes up, I can just talk a bit about what we're going to do today. So I'm breaking down the design process that I tend to use into these discover, design, and deliver phases. So a really important theme I want to highlight right at the start is that the design process is not linear. Sometimes we would, oh, there's the poll. Awesome. Sometimes we like to imagine that we just come up with an idea and then it's a matter of fine tuning and massaging that idea into its final form. But the design process, I want to encourage you to really allow that process to be like the opposite of linear. I like to think about it as alternating expansion and like expanding and refining, I think is the words that I use here. So if you look at this kind of little drawing on the left here, at each moment kind of branching out to explore many possibilities, filtering and narrowing back in, and then branching again. And so in an actual design process, I will very likely revisit those first stages, discovering, designing, expanding, and refining multiple times. For the sake of our like time limit today, we're going to move through in a somewhat more linear fashion. So I just want to make sure we have that at the start. And okay, poll results. Okay, so I see a lot of personal, professional logos for someone else and yourself. Cool. Sounds great. Okay, Barrett, you can move on. And as I walk you through these steps today, I'm going to show the actual sketches and the stages I've made for a project that I did for Barrett a couple of years ago. All right, so the very first phase always of any design process, no matter what you're designing, is to really make sure you understand the challenge that has been set before you. And so it'll be brief today, but I'll encourage you guys, if you're actually doing this, to like really slow down and sink into the stage before you start anything else. And so I'll talk through these questions in terms of how I answered them together with Barrett. If you are making a logo for somebody else, this can be a combination of your own research and conversations you have with your client. If it's for yourself, have this conversation with yourself and really try to clarify these things. So actually, I would like to make sure that everybody has some paper and just something to write with. You'll need that for the rest of this. And okay, so for Pupating Lab, so who or what is the logo representing and what matters to them? I know a little bit about Barrett. We've known each other for quite a bit now, and we've spent a glorious summer together in Panama. But I also went and did some research by like reading up on the Pupating Lab. Barrett already had a website. An excerpt of that is on the side, Pupating Lab, where I study insect behavior, sleep, and explore the ways in which insects have affected humans through history. It's also a collaborative. It's not just Barrett. It is rather a whole lab, including many students and collaborators. And then he has this bit about why he named the lab pupating. So there's a definition of pupating at the bottom. Would you like to add anything, Barrett?
Yeah, so I wanted a logo that would be evocative, that draws in this idea of metamorphosing, changing, transforming, growing, but also borrow from our ideas about sleep and dreaming.
And so if I heard him say something like that, I would probably jot down, I wrote down evocative, metamorphosis, changing, growing, sleep, and dreaming. Who is the audience? So I'd ask Barrett, like, yeah, where do you see yourself using this logo?
And I'd probably answer, I'd love to use it on posters or presentation at conferences, for example. I'd like to include it on t-shirts, the lab flag, capes, basically scalable where it might be fun for students and others to share this symbol that associates them with this lab in various ways. So the audience could be fellow biologists, those who might be curious about nature or insects, for example.
And for this audience question, I believe Barrett has brought up the importance of understanding your audience in any visualization. I would encourage you guys, as you think of your answers and write down your answers, to not just say everybody, because we could say we would like our logo to be seen and appealing to everybody, but to also be specific about who you're prioritizing. So my read on Barrett's logo request was that the audience would likely be both an academic audience, so like Barrett's colleagues, other people in academia and the sciences, students, collaborators, as well as sort of his like public, like science engagement audience. So people who might come to the lab who maybe have some interest, because Barrett does a lot of outreach work. And we'd already started to touch. Oh, go ahead, Barrett.
I just wanted to interject that I transferred Amy's slides moments ago. So these aren't step 1, 1, 1, and 1. The numbers actually do grow.
I trust someone can let us know if this is causing a problem for them, but I trust that people have been able to follow along. And so we've gone a little bit into the next number one question about what it will be used for. This is a little bit of a question more about practicalities. So to imagine all possible usages of your logo, whether it needs to work as the little like icon on a tab, like whether it needs to function at that size, whether it wants to be blown up to a billboard, is it going to be in print? Is it going to be digital? Is it primarily for your business cards? Is it going to be like t-shirts and mugs? And these are all important questions. Like, does it need to work in both color and black and white? You might have a beautiful color logo that then needs to be reproduced without color, and turns out like it loses a lot of its meaning. And lastly, oh yeah, go ahead.
You see here, this is one of the first pages of my book, and the logo is kind of this stunning, iconic, symbolic visual introduction.
Yeah. And the last block of questions, what should the logo do? So what do you want the logo to communicate? What do you want people to do when they see it? Is there an action included in that logo? Do you want them to then go to your website and become overwhelmed with curiosity? Do you want them to turn the page? Do you want them to click on it? Do you want them to buy something? Do you want them to just be impressed with you? Like, any of answers are welcome. And what do you want people to feel when they see it? So what does the logo evoke at a glance? Because an important thing about a logo is logos are often seen very quickly. And while you might love to have a logo that can be savored and the details can be appreciated, most people will look at a logo at a glance, and your logo needs to function in that way. So just at a glance, what does your logo evoke? If we go to the next slide, Barrett. There's a link down there that I can also pop in the chat right now. And this is just, I just Googled lists of design adjectives. If you want some place to start, looking through that list and just thinking of like what applies or doesn't apply to the feeling you want your logo to evoke. And now I'm going to give you guys 5 minutes to answer these questions for your project. Do write them down. It can be just bullet or notes. And if you have any questions for us, feel free to like pop in the chat and ask them now. Okay, how do you find a balance between scientifically accurate but simplified? That is a great question. And I think we might be able to address that a little bit further on. But it is, yeah, I think Barrett and I, we could chat about that maybe a little bit later. So I'll go to the other one first. How do you decide whether to incorporate the lab name in the logo itself or keep the name separate and make a symbol for the lab? That is a great question to answer right now. Because under what will it be used for, I think is an important, and what the logo does, that's important to ask for yourself is like, does your logo stand alone or will it always be with text? And if it is with text, are you going to be designing the text for it? If it is always with text, I would suggest that you incorporate the text in your logo. And also later when we create it, to maybe have multiple versions of that. If you look at many universities or lab, either the name is in the lab or they have versions of the logo where the mark might stand by itself. And then both maybe like a horizontal format, a vertical format, a square format, in which that logo and the text are together. So I'd say that's an important question to answer for yourself right now. Yeah, so it depends is the answer, but it should be thought about early on. And okay, Barrett, I mean, we could probably have an interesting conversation. Everybody else, like you've got a minute and a half left. Feel free to mute us if you need quiet while you do your work or turn the volume down. But the question about scientifically accurate and simplified, I'd connect that to our current stage by considering who your audience is and who you're representing. So if you are more of a popular brand, then scientifically accurate may not be as high of importance. If you are representing a lab, or like the Genetics Association or something like that, then it might be extremely important that your logo is accurate. Especially if you're not relying on your logo to maybe sell your work as much. If it's not needing to pull as much weight with a large audience, but rather like I would tip those scales. So for me, working with Barrett, I also know that for him as a person, accuracy is of great importance. So I'm going to bump that up and I might make some aesthetic sacrifices in order to prioritize accuracy. I think Barrett did say that early on for science communication, accuracy comes above aesthetics in your list of priorities. That depends on what your logo is being used for. Cool. Effective brainstorming techniques. We are going to
Coming
do some of
soon.
those. That will be
Coming
awesome.
soon.
We will do that one. And can you show to create your own platform? Okay, that is beyond the scope of the workshop today. So we are going to focus more on the brainstorming and design portion. The actual aesthetics and creation is probably something that would have to be another workshop.
And can I say that the beauty of running these workshops is that here we go, already it's happening. Look at Olga's chat and others. We can serve as our own helpful resource. So if you guys have ideas of directions, please do share in the chat with us and everyone involved. So if you have
Awesome.
ideas of different directions, that's great. So the scope
Cool.
of this workshop could be greatly expanded by your input as well.
Great. And we're going to move on to our next stage now. Great, brainstorming. So one of the first things we're going to do is just do kind of a wild associative brainstorm. So starting with at the center, whoever or whatever you're representing with your logo, and then just allow your mind to wander and make as many associations as you can. So this was not the original one that I did. This is what I just did the other day. But the key things I want you guys to bring with you as you begin this is it does not need to be clean. Don't overthink it. Write down everything you can think of. And I'm giving you another 5 minutes, and I would like you to try to fill that time with writing. So to try to push yourself, even if you feel like you've completed something, to think of more things or to make more associations. That will be one of the kind of key takeaways about brainstorming, is to try to really squeeze yourself past the first ideas that come to mind, and then continue on. Similarly, I'm going to start the time, and if you have any questions, go ahead and ask them. How do you decide whether a logo should be primarily a logo type, a logogram, or a combination of both? Um, so yeah, okay, so this is also a question about text. Um, and I think that again depends on what you're using it for. So I can't give you a hard answer to that. I think that is both, like, it might be a question of your strengths. Um, I find I am more of an image person than a font person. So I might lean towards having an image in addition to text. Somebody who feels that they are really strong and really passionate in typography might stay with type as well. I find that having images for something like a lab, in which it's not like a logo like Google, which will be pervasive in people's lives. A lab logo is something that probably won't be encountered that often. I find that images give you an opportunity to communicate a bit more about that lab, than just the text by itself. Um, Similarly, I might, for that same reason, I might for a lab try to combine both text and image, because it is unlikely that that logo by itself will be recognizable enough to trigger that association, again, for a lab, versus like, I'm thinking of very notable logos, like Shell comes to mind. You might see like a gas station logo or McDonald's, which actually is an M, but some of those logos by themselves, we see them often enough that we don't need the text to know who they belong to. A lab logo or a personal logo is probably not going to become so popular that people will recognize it by the image alone. So that's like a few things that I'm thinking about when considering this project. When starting to consider a project. Okay,
Oh,
next
I love
question.
this one. What if you
What if you
design your
yeah,
what
go
if you
ahead,
design
Barrett.
your professional logo and get bored within 3 months and want to redesign it? ADHD brain. I'm guessing that, Karat,
Mhm.
you don't have any tattoos. Just a guess here, because if you get
I would
bored
say,
quickly with
yeah.
imagery, yeah.
Well, I would say, for example, hopefully your personal professional logo is not going to cost as much to rebrand as, say, the Pepsi logo. So if you're thinking about like rehauling, you can redesign it. Like, I think it's not that big of a deal. If it's your personal logo and you do want to redesign it, perhaps you enjoy the design process and you'll land on something really beautiful later on. Um, if there's a further problem that you'd like to get into with that, we can definitely discuss it more. I don't see it as a problem if it's your personal logo. You might sacrifice some brand recognition if that's the case. Can we? I See,
Oh,
I think
yeah.
Karat, I'm sorry if I'm
Let's
pronouncing your
try.
name incorrectly, is asking a
Let's
question.
see. Let me try. I'm not sure.
Hi, thanks, Emmy. Yeah, it's a professional logo, and I agree. Like, it can confuse the clients. It can
Mhm.
confuse the audience if I'm designing it every 3 months. And for me, it's definitely fun. But yeah, that's the challenge I have. And I don't have any tattoo, Barrett. You're correct.
I would say for you as well, then like something I might recommend is like doing this process slowly. Like rushing to a logo will make it more likely that you'll want to change it later. And if you spend like in your own time, more time with each of these stages and more time in your draft stages, you might come up with something that has greater longevity. Um, yeah,
Yeah, awesome. I'll try that. Thanks. And
no
And
problem. Okay,
and
I
you
think we're
might
about
and you
at
might fi
time.
and you might find that, as Amy was suggesting, that at least variants on the same theme, so it's still recognizable as
Mhm.
the symbol of, say, for example, your lab, but goes through a variation, a change, a metamorphosis over time, that would still be acceptable and may cater to your need for change.
Great. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. Okay, someone asked me about mood boards, and we are here. We have arrived at the mood board stage. So the next phase is visual research. So once I've kind of just brainstormed out of my own head, I'll take it to the world and to other imagery. I both tend to look at other logos that are similar. So if you're looking at lab logos, I will look at other lab logos. If I know that Barrett is an insect scientist and this logo is likely going to include insects, I will look for insect logos as well, regardless of where they are. So if you see in this top row on the slide, I have this honey brie, like this a charcuterie company that uses a bee in their logo. I know Barrett has pointed out previously that this is in fact a bumblebee and not a honeybee.
Arg! And I'll have to say that far too often on billboards and advertisements and logo designs, you'll see inaccuracies that are preventable. They're unintentional. So
Mhm.
they could have focused on the appropriate species and still made an aesthetically comparable, equally beautiful and effective logo.
So I think your designer at that point either just genuinely nobody knew the difference, or made a decision to prioritize aesthetics over accuracy, which whether or not that is ultimately forgivable, I will say you can get away with that more if you're a brie company than if you're an insect lab. And so then I have a couple of other biology lab logos that just came up in a search. These kind of probably just rapidly generated stock logos. Because at this stage, I'm doing research, so I both want to look for things I like and also things I dislike. And so to clarify for myself, like what are people doing in this space? Are there trends I want to follow? Are there things that I'm seeing that I'm not a fan of? Like I want my logo to stand out amongst these ideas. I'm also looking beyond logos at other artwork, at photography, at different styles, any source of visual inspiration, really. So I have one of Barrett's artworks up here, as Barrett is an artist himself. So I'm looking at his artworks. I'm looking at some kind of random things. Like I found this drawing that has this like dragonfly bowl design, which I thought was quite pleasing. I'm looking at beetles. I also know because accuracy is important for Barrett, I'm looking at the pupa of the species that he studies. So these are honeybee pupa. Versus also like maybe the pupa that are most recognizable to the public, like maybe this monarch butterfly pupa. So here, if you haven't already started, I'd like to give you guys 5 minutes to do a little bit of searching and look for logos you like, logos you dislike. Try to clarify for yourself at least briefly why, what it is you like or dislike about that logo. And then to just take yourself on a bit of a walk and browse for some visual inspiration. This stage takes more than 5 minutes for me, but in order for us to get through everything else, I'll just tap you guys at 5 minutes right now so you can briefly search. I will do this for a long time. I enjoy it. I will also do it while I'm out for a walk. If I know I have a project on my mind, I might just like see a leaf or an advertisement or a photo that I get excited about and just gather that up throughout the day. And I'll come back to this kind of stage throughout the process. So as I generate more ideas, I may want more reference images or to look for more things. And I've included a link that I also put in the chat of this wasn't for Barrett's project, but for the Editing Nature project. And sorry, that's a direct message. Everybody. You can take a look at like, I think I have 300 pins on that board. Cool, and I see some recommendations for other sort of inspiration gathering tools. Okay, you guys have
And
a couple minutes to do so? Yeah,
And I'd
Barrett.
like to add that you'll have the opportunity, if you so wish, to upload what you deem to be an effective logo and to upload what you deem to be a less effective logo. And if we have time at the end, we could look at some of your choices, some of your selections, and share the favored and the unfavored logos. We'll add those two links in the chat. Do you have those handy, Amy? Could you pop those in the chat?
Yeah, I do. There you go.
Great.
And I'm seeing a couple of questions at the moment. Karen says, I designed my logo years ago and love it. How should I approach these exercises if I'm open to evolving it or improving it, but I'm happy with what I already have? Cool. I think you're in a great place because you can't lose. Either you'll have a logo that you like even more, or you will be very happily satisfied with the logo you have. If you're interested in just doing the exercises or exploring, well, one, you could switch a project. You could design a logo for something else. If you have a professional logo, picking a personal or vice versa. Alternatively, you could just go ahead and do these exercises and see what comes out of it. I've talked about this expanding and contracting and expanding and contracting. You've arrived at this like refined point where you like the logo you have. I'd encourage you to play right now and expand and kind of just explore the space of alternate realities. Like what else could have happened? And as a fun exercise, I would encourage you to try to think very different because you could start with that refined logo and just tweak it aesthetically. But I would love for you to just walk out in sort of like wildly different directions and imagine what very different logos could have looked like.
Here's another
yeah.
one that I think is pretty important. Gradient in logos, ask Perez. Yes or not?
That is situation dependent. It depends on one, like, yeah, I apologize, but I will not be able to give you a hard yes or no for that question. I think I need more context into where that gradient is used and whether it is distracting or contributing, whether it's part of a unified aesthetic, like that gradient is conveying something, whether that be content or a mood, or evoking a certain aesthetic. Like I see this molecular biology lab has a bit of a gradient in that DNA. I take no issue with that. I think it's a way of creating turning a simple, pretty monocolor logo into something a little bit more dynamic. But there are also times where it's very trendy to just put gradients on things. And I think if it isn't really serving that purpose, then it doesn't really serve that purpose. If you have a more specific example, actually, if you are willing to find some example of gradient logos, we could talk about in a context whether those gradients seem to be working or not.
And I can add
Yeah.
that pragmatically, it's a small, but a small subset of scenarios where they aren't rendered clearly or effectively. So the gradient, if you're
Yeah.
going black to white, maybe it ends up becoming pixelated and not the beautiful gradation that you had originally envisioned.
That is a great point, and I would say if you want a gradient on your logo, to make sure your logo also functions without the gradient. Functions just as well without the gradient. Okay, I'm gonna wrap us up and move on, and I see there are more questions, and we will have breaks in which to try to address those. Cool. Oh yes, we do
In
have a break
fact,
right now.
now.
Perfect. Okay, so these are, you can upload your effective and less effective logos. Feel free to take a break for a couple of minutes right now. I think I'm gonna keep it to around a 5-minute break so that we can have more time for feedback at the end. Feel free to get up. And if you are still inspired, you can look at this link that I think Barrett's got his mouse on just at the
Oh
bottom
yeah.
of this screen.
Oh, so my mouse
I'll put
does
it,
appear.
it does,
I'm
at
gonna
least it does for me.
Oh, okay, got it.
I can also
I'm
put this in the chat right now.
Yeah, that'd be
Um,
great. This is
so
fun. So you'll see that that site has an interesting set of logos. It might appear blank initially, but if you click on them, then they'll appear, just as this owl-eyed logo that I put up briefly showed. Monica just asked, I would like to learn more about what Barrett said regarding scalable logos. Could you provide more details on that? And for a number of us who joined for an earlier workshop, we talked a bit about raster-based versus vector-based digital production of imaging. And if you go vector-based, that means there's an algorithm underlying it so that whatever you produce in, for example, Adobe Illustrator or Inkscape, what happens then is when you zoom in, since it's not pixel-based, it will recalculate all of those vectors and you'll have a perfectly smooth, whatever image you've created, curves, letters, numbers, in perfect resolution at any scale. So that may affect your decision as to how you produce your logo at the outset. If you decide to convert a photograph, or which I don't recommend, or a digital drawing, or a physical drawing that you scan in and digitize and then modify and clean up, that will be raster based, and that won't be infinitely scalable in terms of making it infinitely larger, because the pixels will show it will all break down. But if you start vector-based, again with Inkscape, a freely available program, for example, then you could zoom in, zoom in, zoom in. But if you decide my logo, who's my audience, how am I going to use it, key questions that Amy asked early on, and you decide my logo is never going to be reproduced larger than my original drawing, it'll only be shrunk down, vector-based and scalability is less of an issue. It's still an issue, because if you produce something this large and you want it to be on a conventionally sized business card, for example, what you do in great detail here will end up being a black blob when it's here. So think about your canvas and think about that scalability.
Great. I see there's someone had a question in the chat about logos that had a bad landing on launch and were mocked only to later be amongst the elite. So I don't have a specific example in mind, but this is common advice. People are like, when you rebrand a logo, be aware that, especially if you're rebranding a major logo, people will likely hate it when you first change it. And so a negative launch is not always a death sentence for a logo. Because people can be quite resistant to change and the brand familiarity that has been built into the previous logo.
And
So
an
yeah,
an infamous example of that was when Gap changed its logo, and there was a furor over that.
Yeah, it's actually fun that it is in like design handbooks. So people are like, don't like, they will probably hate it. For your personal lab logo, I feel like it's less likely to be a problem if you're working personally. Um,
How important is the typography or font? Very. So
yes, very important.
very, and not just to designers. So do you choose serif, sans serif, right? For example, how legible is it? And here comes the scalability question again. If you go very small, is it still legible? That will be key. But also, designers tend to make fun of Arial and other oft overused. And if you want to go for something unique that doesn't look dated, unless, of course, your business or your personal draw is to be retro, for example, you just have to be careful about what emotions your typography evoke.
Great. Typography is not my specialty. I wish it were. It is very important. It is very important. So the logo examples I've given you today don't include typography in them, but it is something to consider from the start, I'd say. Okay, Barrett, will you load us up and let's go on to the next slide.
Will do. Here.
So we are entering, we've just done a lot of discovery, so brainstorming, exploring, research, and we are now going to enter into the designing portion of our workshop. And as I say here, we're entering design, but first, before we move on into generating real images and thinking about design, I would love for you guys to just take 2 minutes to revisit what you've done in the previous section and to distill it down to what you feel is most important. That can be a moving target. So what you're doing right now is planting yourself a guidepost of your priorities. You may move that guidepost later on if you decide something is different, but be clear about it. So I've given my answers here. So what does your logo represent? I've got Pupating Lab and Barrett Klein. What informationally is important to convey? So when someone sees this logo, what information would you like that logo to communicate to them? In this case, I've pulled from his website and been like, well, it's a lab that studies insect sleeps and deals with art and science. Those are some of the things I'd like informationally to come across. And what does the logo need to evoke? So here you can list some adjectives or guiding words and key ideas. Try to keep it brief. If you've generated a long list, try to circle the ones that you feel are most important. So for Barrett's lab, I'm thinking about evoking curiosity. I'm thinking I want the logo to be creative, playful, organic, and dynamic. And I'm bringing in the key idea of pupating, which is in the name of the lab. There's already been an idea that Barrett has thought about, and of pupating as transformation, metamorphosis, potential. For me, pupating is also mystery. Like talk about what happens to an insect as it transforms in that stage. And I believe Barrett listed a few words himself while he was talking about his lab earlier. But yeah, so those are my answers. And I would love for you to do this and to write them at the top of a page because we're going to use the rest of the page, but I want you to be able to see your answers while you do so. Okay, 2 minutes. Okay, Barrett, let's move us on. Okay, so now this is one of my favorite stages of the design process, which is making thumbnails. So on the rest of your page, you are going to make as many thumbnail sketches as possible. I'd say at least 10, if you're curious as to what as many means. I'd say at least 10 thumbnails, but more if you possibly can. You're going to have a full 10 minutes to do so. And I'm going to really encourage you to use that entire 10 minutes. So this is the stage. Someone was asking a bit about time, and I will talk about that a little bit later. But this is the stage where I most often actually set myself a timer. because I want to, again, try to challenge myself not to rest on one of the first ideas I come with, but to try to push through and to generate as much as I can and explore as many different spaces as possible. We are very much in the this is the most expansive of the expansion stages. So don't worry about filtering and don't worry about the quality of your drawings. I would say, so the image I have here is, I did this as like a digital sketch, I believe. I am sure that I have for this project, like a notebook with even sketchier, like little drawings in it, that I just haven't digitized. And so I don't have that material available. Yes, I see the drawing skills. I don't want you to worry about drawing skills. I do have a background in drawing. Don't let that put you off, because the point on here is to get ideas on the paper and maybe to start to think visually. Some people also do this stage with collage. I think that may be too time consuming for this workshop today, but you're welcome to do that as well. And the two tips I have for you are to want to use the ideas you've generated in previous exercises. So like when I was brainstorming about the honeybee and I'm thinking about honeycombs. So I'm like playing with the shape of a honeycomb or the recognizable shape of that and the pupa. And to try simple combinations. I saw someone just put in the chat this like harebrained logo that has like the brain shape with the hair in it. Many really effective logos are a very simple combination of two ideas. And to show an example of that is I had like a honeybee and then I had this lotus flower. And I liked that a lotus flower blooming, a flower blooming can evoke potential. And so this one idea at the bottom here was kind of trying to combine the wings of a honeybee, but perhaps inside a pupa with the idea of a flower blooming. Again, if you have any questions, let us know. And I'm going to start the time. And I encourage you now, if you have a question, we will answer it and I can perhaps answer some questions, but like turn the volume down low and actually spend this time filling up your page.
I'm doing it.
Great. I think I'll do it as well.
Amy, if you're listening, Michael asked, how do you usually assess your drafts? Do you ask people for input, or how do you know that people will actually see what you saw or try to convey? For example, the pupa and the flower sketch.
So an important thing for this stage in particular is it doesn't matter what anybody else can read your drawings. This is just for you. And so communication will be very important later on. But your sketches at this moment do not need to be legible. There are later stages. So I'd say when you're in an expanding phase, I would encourage you not to filter yourself or not to judge too much or think about feedback. And when you come to the refining stage, where we will get to later, is when you will ask for input, in which you will start to think about which of these designs are working or not working or why. And hopefully we'll have time to maybe pull up some of your drafts and maybe we can go through and demonstrate some of that feedback process or assessing and massaging process later on. What if you get through 5 drawings and you feel one is really working? Great question. Keep going. That is the key point of this stage, is to not settle on the first idea that you think is going to work. It doesn't matter if the next drawings don't produce anything, but like push yourself to fully explore the space. You're trying to cover as much ground in your kind of idea space as possible. And then the next stage, you'll get to decide which ones are working the best. I will say it is sometimes the case that the first idea you have is just like, you do all of them and you're like, yeah, that first one was it. But it is also often the case that it is the 18th idea that really triggers something, or the 18th idea that doesn't work, but later on you realize has the seed of something, and then off of that idea you end up going somewhere else that was kind of new and unexpected. So yes, that's by design. The 10-minute timer often feels long. I might set myself even 15 or 20 minutes. And push myself to keep generating new combinations all the way through to the end of that time. Thank you for your question. Oh, a question from Nia or Naya about how much time I typically spend per logo at the research and design stages in total. When do you know when to stop or when it's good enough? If time is unlimited, is it based on feeling? That's also a really good question. It varies based on project. So if I'm working with a client, I might be paid for this, and perhaps I'm paid hourly, or perhaps there's a certain budget in which I might set the amount of time I'm willing to spend on this logo in advance. And then I will time box myself for each of these stages. If it's more of a personal project or a project that has a larger budget, I will still tend to give myself a timer, but what I might do is repeat stages. So after doing the thumbnails, I might go back to visual research. I might generate more thumbnails, and then I might move on from there. I tend not to do unlimited because the amount of space is unlimited. Like you can just keep going. Yeah. I think it probably depends on personality as well. Like I tend to maybe be a little perfectionistic, and so I might just keep on exploring or fiddling with something if I don't set myself it needs to be done by now and move on. If you tend to be somebody who tends to stop at the first idea and be like, that's good enough, then setting the timer might push you to continue to edit and generate throughout that full time. I hope that answers your question. I'd have to think for a moment, but I could maybe give you an estimate of like how much time I spent on this logo project. It has really depended. So,
Amy?
yeah.
Ashlyn asked, do you ever give editable versions of your logo to the customer, maybe to let them change any text as their company evolves or change background colors? Any tips, tricks for that?
Yes. Usually, I think often, yes, you will provide an editable version of your logo, if not for your client directly to edit, but for a future designer, say if they're ever going to rebrand or discover a new usage for that logo, an editable version of your file will enable that to kind of transition seamlessly. Yeah, you can do that. I think with allowing your client or your customer to edit the logos or make design decisions, I think that's very dependent on the particular relationship. So like with me and Barrett right now, I know Barrett has his own art background and his own artistic sense. So I think I gave him more input than I would give maybe another client as far as the pupating logo, and then more freedom to choose. At certain points, I would just toss a decision to them. I'd just be like, which one do you prefer? And then Barrett was able to choose among the options. And as far as the practicalities for that, definitely having like an Illustrator or your vector graphic file is important. If you have, yeah, like saving in a file format that is editable and scalable so that they can alter those raw files.
Amy?
Yeah.
The tattoo-free Karat is back, asking, what do you think about the animated logos? And I'd like to add that animated logos can be beautiful, engaging, fun. I showed one with the owl eyes in the presentation, but of course the limitation is not just who your audience is, but how they're accessing your logo. It better be transferable to a still image that's at least as effective, let's say.
Yeah, situation dependent. And your time is up now, so I hope you guys have tried to go through to the end. Where's the image in the center?
Oh, that was this one.
Yes. Great. Oh, also for Ashlyn about the editable version of the logo, I will show you at the end the package that I delivered to Barrett. when he received his logo and the options I gave him. So the kind of editability that enabled.
Keep in mind, if your
Um,
name is associated with a logo, you might define the limits to which your client can alter that logo because it still reflects your professional output.
mhm. It is often the case that because you are the hired designer, you often want to have very specific channels for input from your client. Okay, let's move on, Barrett. There's a
Catherine
lot of
says,
very
I can't.
interesting questions. There's a lot of very
Yeah,
interesting questions, but we're gonna have to keep going so we can look at
right,
your logos.
right.
Okay, so that was our big expansion stage. We're going to narrow and then expand again. So for the sake of our time right now, I'm going to have you look at your page of thumbnails and circle for me 2 of the ones you find the most compelling at this point. And also be clear, it can help to write down what the simple ideas. Barrett mentioned describability as a virtue amongst logos. So it can help to clarify for yourself by writing down in words what that logo design is or what the key idea of that logo is. So I have this example. I've called it the Vitruvian Man honeybee pupa, which is if you know of like Da Vinci's kind of classic Vitruvian Man, like this kind of geometric drawing of this man, because I thought that that image, one, is like a recognizable aesthetic, and it has this kind of science art combination, like science art, and then evokes the sense of like intense observation. I'd say like observation, beauty, precision. Um, so I had this idea of like, can you do something with a pupa and that blueprinting? So that's one idea that I circled. And the second one of a pupa dreaming of different wings. So bringing in the sleep element. And so for this section, I might give you less than 10 minutes so that we can move on to talking about designs and more chatting and questions. But to take each of the designs and now iterate off of them again. So generate at least 3 ideas off of each. When I do this for myself, I tend to pick more than 2. I'll do at least 3 ideas, and then give myself more space to not only generate variations, but to wander again. So each of these 3 ideas is a new post from which I'm starting, and I'm now entering another exploratory phase.
So what do you think,
Um,
5 minutes and 12 seconds?
so we'll see how it feels. We'll see how it
Okay,
feels, but we'll have you guys
sounds
start
good.
now, so make the most of your time. Okay, Catherine has a very fun question, which is, I can't tell if I hate some of my ideas or if my drawings are just ugly, but the ideas have potential. How would you deal with this? That is an awesome question. And part of that for me involves like making, if you think an idea has potential, making multiple aesthetically different versions of that. So as we'll see, like the kind of pupa dreaming idea I have here has a lot of different versions, and I think some of these are pretty ugly. I will also say, so some of that is going back to visual research. So maybe like if you think you have an idea that's interesting, looking up more reference images of different ways that can be displayed. If drawing is not your strong point, you can try collaging at that point as well. Um, and you can try collaging with images and seeing if anything comes out of that. Okay, I answered that. And I think it's good practice to just be like, at this stage, let your drawings be ugly. Like they don't need to be aesthetically interesting. Catherine has also asked a great question, which is, how do you find a good balance between how specific your logo should be, that it's still relevant, so that it's still relevant if your research branches, but also distinct? Is this question more about incorporating your specific, perhaps lab interests, but wanting to make it so that it's still able to be relevant if your research changes direction? Or is it a question about specificity versus like readability or impact? If you're listening and you can clarify, that would be great. Generally, it's a great question to be asking because it's very much one of the things that you'll have to consider. I do think it can tend to be a spectrum between being very specific and detailed, but also having a logo that's simple, readable, and effective. For example, like the Animal Minds Lab one that I did, I found I was able to incorporate specificity just by being a little bit more specific in my silhouettes. Like, for example, the crow in the middle, allowing that like upturned beak. That is a specific detail about New Caledonian crows, but also not necessarily relevant or distracting to someone who sees that logo at a glance. And then that logo, I'd say, would still apply even if they were to choose to work with other animals. And you can let me know if that answers your question or not, or if you have another question. And for the rest of you, you've got about 1 minute to work on these designs. Okay, and this is an upload stage. So this is about where I'm going to bring you into through our design process today. So you guys have a couple minutes. You can start now to clean up one final idea and upload it to the drive. So I would like you to, by clean up, I don't mean it has to be the most beautiful drawing, but at this stage, I'm creating a drawing that is readable enough that somebody else could look at it and understand the idea. And to include, so like in this box on the side, maybe have one sentence at the top that briefly states what your logo is for, then the idea for the logo, and then a description of that idea. So this is coming back to Barrett's describability. Can you describe the core gist of that idea in words? Okay, Monica asks, if my brand name is the name of an animal, but I want to represent my logo with a completely different animal, is that advisable or valid? Monica, I think I'd love to know some more details about your project specifically. Feel free to upload your idea if you'd like direct feedback on it. But yeah, I'd love to hear more about like what your brand is about, in addition to what the name is, like what it does, and what your reasoning is for wanting to choose a different animal for the imagery. I see that Andrea has a question, which says that she wants to design a logo for freelance work, but doesn't want to be constrained to a specific idea like botany or ecology because she's still in the beginning stages of figuring out her own niche. Designed several logos for herself, but never ended up sticking with one. Do you have any ideas for how to tackle such a nebulous goal? That is a great question. I would suggest like maybe looking at other personal logos that people have made. I have a friend of mine who is a developer but does all kinds of projects. And he has chosen kind of like a stylized red panda logo for his own personal logo because of a personal connection that he feels with that animal, and the design of it. In that case, it is sorry, I just distracted by other questions appearing. But in that case, the red panda itself is is a symbol rather than an icon, if that makes sense. Like it doesn't directly relate to any aspect of his work. It's not a literal depiction of something that he studies or something that he works with. But for him, perhaps embodies a sense of perhaps an aesthetic, a playfulness, his general interest in animals in the natural world, even if his work doesn't reflect that explicitly. So if you don't want to be constrained to like botany or ecology, you might look in other stages of your life for other things that have personal meaning for you. It also might mean that you will redesign your logo once you've sort of sorted or kind of refined your brand identity. Happy to talk about that, perhaps more in depth with more detail. Okay. I'm going to move on. If you're still uploading your logos, go ahead and do so. And I'm just going to walk us through what, oh, I see lots of logos up. That's so exciting. Okay, I'm going to resist looking at them just in this moment because we have a few more slides to get through. And we're not in this workshop. We don't have time to kind of go through what it looks like to take these ideas through to the final logo. But I just want to give you a quick overview of that so you know what it looks like. We've really focused today on the idea generating and what I feel like is the meat of the designing and less on the implementation. So this was an idea that I moved with, the pupa dreaming of different wings. If you can see from the previous slide, it actually, I've changed the pupa now with feedback from Barrett. If you look at this initial moth pupa that I have under the number 2 here, that was a moth pupa, and I was like, that won't do for Barrett because Barrett doesn't work often with moths. He works with honeybees. And so next slide, Barrett. We've changed to this honeybee pupa that is more anatomically accurate. And then you can click through to the next slide. I'd have these other versions where I'm using collage now to collage different insect wings there. We've changed the wing placement. And the next slide, to this, which would have been the final drawing of this logo that was Barrett approved. If you go to the next slide, Barrett. We can kind of trace a kind of linear path of this particular idea through the jungle of ideas that came up. From kind of this initial, very kind of sketchy, a little bit derpy, in my opinion, idea of like a pupa sleeping, surrounded by wings. I also had this pupa where like maybe the wings were the shadow. I was thinking a lot about the idea of potential. Then to this moth pupa, which I found aesthetically a little bit easier to work with than a honeybee pupa. It was a bit simpler and more recognizable. To incorporating feedback from Barrett about the importance of that pupa accuracy and refining that down to this collage mock-up in which Barrett and I together chose wings based on aesthetics and also personal connection. And then to this final digital drawing. But I want to emphasize that even though we can kind of see this linear process, the process itself is not linear at all. So next slide. Just as like a recap of all the ideas that came up during this. And you can see kind of from the start, we have the thumbnails and just many, many different ideas. It narrowing down to focus a little bit more on iterations of a couple ideas. And then in this final bottom right corner, like these kind of micro details of us like deciding how many wings we wanted to include. I didn't include the drafts we had where we were just changing the size of the pupa relative to the size of the wings. And this, I would say, is actually one of my shorter design processes. So this doesn't include the paper sketches that I did that I don't have access to. And if I were to pull up, for example, the Editing Nature logo, I could fill slides and slides with the different versions I did. I think this was someone's question about how much time to spend. It depends on the project. So often I'll set with myself and a client how many versions, how many edits we're going to do. So how many rounds of this? So I might do my brainstorm, broad thumbnails, refine a couple ideas, three or so, bring them to a client, have them choose between them and give feedback. Then based on that feedback, refine out a few more ideas, narrow back down again, bring them a few more options, talk that over, get feedback, both from the client, but perhaps also people who are design-minded or whose aesthetic judgments I trust. And then repeat that process, but have set in advance how long I want to spend. Because you could spend forever, like you could keep nitpicking and exploring other ideas. And so I'll just say, okay, for this project, we're going to do 2 rounds, right? We'll do 2 rounds of different ideas, and then we'll pick one and refine it. Yeah, you can also set yourself a time frame, being like, this project needs to be done in 2 weeks or a month. And this is how long I'm willing to spend at each stage during that. Okay, I find that's very helpful for getting a project done. Okay, next slide. And very briefly, talking about delivery. So from that final drawing we saw, now this is the kind of final package I delivered to Barrett. So I delivered both color and black and white versions. I provided 3 different color options. I provided files as SVG files, scalable vector graphics, so that Barrett could scale them at will. I also sent him the Illustrator file that includes, for example, the layers that were used to color the wings, so that if he so desired, he could change the color or overlay different patterns on this logo. I also sent him, for ease of use, like both PNG files are great for because they're lossless compression. So PNG files that are a little easier to handle and immediately use in the vector graphic. And also like JPEGs in common formats. So if you already know you're going to be using your logo in a standard like 500 by 500 pixel, it can be really useful to just provide your client with a couple standard file sizes so that they don't have to go in and re-download and configure the file every time. If you're not using a scalable vector graphic, I think Barrett touched on this. It's just really important before you start the rendering of your final image that you make sure your image file is large enough for all of your intended uses. There are fancy ways you can try to scale things up, but it'll take more work. Great. And is that my last slide, Barrett?
Yes.
All right, let's take a look at some of these logos.
Excellent. How exciting.
Barrett, you're in charge, so I will browse. Oh, I'm currently looking at the one that I think is at the top because it's titled 01, my silly art shop logo. Perhaps everyone can look at that while Barrett is pulling up the screen. So this person clearly has some design and drawing background. I love the character that you've chosen for your art business. Okay, so this logo is for a small art business on Etsy and Market. Draws inverts and weird creatures. Okay, that's awesome. So I'm seeing this final logo looks like it would be is very distinctive, is very memorable, definitely conveys this kind of like quirky character sense. So that's awesome. I like the subtle usage of color. So this logo would work well on like a medium scale. And that could totally be your usages. So like a question I have that is uninformed would be like, is there a version of this logo that you'd be interested in making function on a much smaller scale? And I think you have a lot of potential here for simplifying your logo to be used as an even smaller brand mark.
And Amy, can you
This looks
see
like
that
your
now?
company sticker. Yeah, I can.
Great.
What do you think, Barrett? I'm like, this looks like it would be an awesome
Wow.
like brand sticker, right? To like
It
that
is
you could give out or put on water bottles or have on a t-shirt.
it is adorable.
It is. Um,
I love it. And even at that size and a bit smaller, I can distinguish, say, the nautiloid from a vermiform insect, as well as the pencil and the brush in the paws, the hands of the little green meow.
yeah. So what this
I-
logo I feel like is doing well for me, it's conveying a lot of character, especially for an art business. I feel like you're getting that across quite well.
and the
Do you want to
color
pick another
choice.
one? Oh, sorry, go ahead,
Yeah,
Barrett.
sure. I just wanted to add that I think the color choices are excellent. I could imagine a variety of other colors being used, but that's a very soothing pairing. And you get the idea of the alien with the antennae on a vertebrate. I mean,
Yeah.
works. Ooh, interesting. So this is gorgeous as a piece of fine art. I'm having difficulty picturing this as a logo versus as an aesthetically appealing like frontispiece, for example. Amy, your thoughts?
Yeah, agreed. I don't see a description on this, so maybe it's harder to say like what the intended usage for the logo is. But yeah, I second what you're saying. It's a beautiful painting. But I think I need to see more about like what the intended usage is,
Yeah.
or as far as it
And
conveying logo information.
I can add that more logos should feature a narwhal. I mean, that's pretty obvious, but let's think about ways of making this image. So for example, you could imagine silhouettes of each being really effective, and then you see this combination of cetaceans under the sea. And again, depending on the intended use, the silhouettes could be scalable and more simplified than this relatively complex array you have here.
Hmm.
Really
Do you want to
nice.
pick one at random, Barrett, and not in order,
Oh
so
my
that
goodness.
we won't be going alphabetically. So it won't just
Okay,
be the people with the alphabetical logos that get to
goodness.
be
Okay,
shared.
I've got this one.
Oh, okay. Research lab
Research.
studying fire, river, and plant communities.
Aha.
Cool.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So
Um,
I get the sense on the, if I'm correct, the sense on the left of fire, water on the right, and then a couple of different, for example, a monocot and maybe eudicot plants in the center, and
mhm.
plant communities because they are in concert or a community within. What I would do is, now color is very important and evokes different emotions. So all of this is fire. These are plants on fire. This signifies warning, aposematism, warning coloration. So maybe if we allow more than one color, I could imagine the expected red on the left, blue on the right, and green in the center, for example.
Yeah, I think this is a beautiful start. It goes well, like I think with the classic kind of like seal format. And I think that evokes already for me like an academic institution, um, which is communicating something in itself. Um, I agree that there are certain little things, like certainly we could keep talking further on about like the aesthetics of communicating more clearly what each of these three things are. But like for a sketch at the start, I'm like, that's a really promising idea. Um, cool. Biohack.
Are those floating eyeballs? Not sure.
Or are they cells?
Or are they
Um,
cells? Oh,
no,
yeah.
but I like that this person is already thinking about their type. Um,
Ah,
about their type and their logo. So without further in so again at this stage you don't need your drawing to be fully, so maybe a few words at the top of this logo would have helped, just for this stage, see where you're going. Um, the Oh, cool, painted turtle. That's really nice.
yeah, this is
Um,
fun.
this
Taking
is
the
very
painted
elegant.
turtle literally.
Yeah. For this logo, I would wonder also whether it could be, I think this could be very effectively further simplified.
Mhm.
Um, you have a very strong silhouette that would be really easy to work with. Like I'm almost wondering if your turtle could be either a negative space or a one space, and to allow those color pops on its back of the palette, to pop out even more clearly. Um, and for this logo to function in a smaller, an even smaller size.
And
I think
let's
again, this
think,
is a very effective mid-size
yeah,
logo.
and let's think in terms of color versus monochromatic. So it
Hmm.
wouldn't fulfill the function that I think you're striving for, Jess, if you have a black and white version or a monochromatic version, but maybe a second version of the logo without what would appear as random splotches on the carapace of this turtle. If you remove those, and now we rely on just the painted brush.
Yeah. I think the brush, I think you could get away with some of those splotches, and the slightly uneven shapes of those splotches could still evoke your artist palette, or the pattern of those splotches, like along the rim with like the smear in the classic artist palette way, could convey the silhouette of artist palette, even if your turtle was simply black and white. If you said
Exactly.
had like a flat black turtle with those white paint splotches, but arranged as an artist palette, I think you could still convey that in a way that would be effective in just black.
And play around with that. All of you can insert your image, your logo inside an image producing software program like Photoshop, GIMP, Krita, and others, and just see if in grayscale it operates as you hope for.
Oh, someone had an
Oh,
idea. Shauna had the idea on the previous one still of also having a version where the typography, like the words, are actually inside the shell as well. And I think that could be very cool.
It could also be pretty complicated. So it'd be interesting to see how that pans out.
Absolutely. Okay. A pitcher plant, medicine. Oh, the unique physical pitcher plants. Cool. Okay, yeah, I
Clinical
like
benefits
that
of pitcher
combination.
plants in pharma. Fascinating. So I think you
Very
might
cool.
need to make that pitcher plant, and this is strange to say for a logo workshop, but a bit more literal, because for the average viewer, it would be difficult without the preliminary sketches, which are so beautiful to the upper left, to say, okay, that's not a trash can or a toilet or something like that, where you want to see a little bit of more of the plant definition or hints within that picture structure.
I would also like I think that I love the designs you're playing with here.
Yeah.
And I think one thing I'd ask about this final logo is less about because I think you're communicating the information extremely clear. Like I could be more clear with the pitcher plant, but the idea of pitcher plant combined with a stethoscope and this like medical symbol
Yeah.
is super, super clear. Um, I wonder as well about what you want to evoke with it, because when I see medical devices, that often can evoke for me a feeling of sterility or maybe some certain unpleasant associations. When thinking just about like I'm almost when I see the bag of the pitcher plant, I'm thinking about like an IV bag. That shape evokes that feeling for me. And I'm
maybe
wondering whether you're feeling um, you want your feeling to be very pharmaceutical, in which case that could work with a slightly more detailed pitcher plant, or whether the goal is to generate interest and make pitcher plants seem super cool. Um, in which case I might personally consider like leaning less into the official, I said someone point like the Red Cross, and maybe a little bit more on the organic oddities of a pitcher plant, and maybe pulling it stylistically more in that direction, even if you still keep the stethoscope or some kind of medical reference.
Yeah,
Um,
and I really like this sketch right here. I
mhm.
think that's really evocative as well. And this one here is a lot of fun. You might also play around with an Erlenmeyer flask, since you're thinking about the chemoassay or bioassay from pitcher plants for pharma. Anyway, a lot of
Some
potential in this one.
some leaves might help you here as well. I know it might not, I don't know enough about pitcher plants to know if they have a very recognizable leaf or if their leaf is something kind of funny, but it could also be other leaves in the environments that pitcher plants grow in to maybe evoke this sense of like lushness or slightly more organicness to counterbalance the medical imagery.
This is a very sweet, simple antelope conservation logo. I think it's quite beautiful. It's
Yeah, I agree.
identifiable.
I think that's very effective. I think this logo is very straightforward and clear
Mhm.
and already has an aesthetic sense going on, and that like this person is probably ready to play with the details of, say, like line weight and other design minutia.
Great.
Yeah, I think the colors are lovely.
Interesting. So this is where the only danger I see is in terms of novelty. So fire is used all over the place. And is this significantly different enough from other logos to evoke exactly what you'd like to achieve? And I see the connection between the paintbrush. I wonder if we need something that draws a little bit more, like here, this one here. I wonder if this achieves more closely than this to what you'd like to the audience to see. I mean, you're painting fire. That's pretty interesting right here, but maybe this one is approaching that more effectively, because I don't see a paintbrush in here, and it would be hard for me to say, well, this could be a lot of different things. Maybe not an individual, like a personal logo for illustration, but here we kind of get it. It's coming closer to that.
I agree with that assessment of what's here right now. I would say if we were working like together on your logo designs for all of these people, I would actually want to go back to your thumbnails and also look at your alternatives beyond just the one finished idea we've brought forward today. For the Elemental Embers logo, there is potential there if you want to use this long form of working more with your type, like in that log per se, or in those fires. That could be a fun way to work with the full name of of your company or your service.
I am so glad that so many people uploaded these logo designs. It's really exciting to see. I'd love to go through each and every one in turn, but I wanted to at least quickly share all of them with everybody.
I had, just because it had been uploaded early, I had quite enjoyed the mycorrhizal signal transmission logo, like the Mystics one with the two parts of the hands coming down. Not the hands, but the
this.
it's the one on the side actually.
Hold on.
I think I actually
This one here?
preferred the one right over, yeah.
Uh-huh.
I thought that was quite it had one clear idea, which I find very effective. Like the idea of that connection that's both emphasized by the color and the shape. Yeah.
Interesting. And I want to pull up this one as well. For a doctoral thesis about spinal cord injury. And you see that break there, which tells you something is wrong. And you definitely can get the hint of vertebrae there with, I assume this is a touch of pelvic girdle. Fascinating. Oh, there's so much potential. And we're already over time. So while we're waiting, Q&A is on. Okay,
Q&A. Let's see, someone had a question about AI and logo preparation. I feel like that's a bit beyond the scope of our talk today. But I welcome you all to try that as a tool for idea generation. Mixed feelings, I will say, for that one so far.
Yeah, I think as we've hinted in previous workshops, AI is no surrogate for the creative process. If used responsibly, it might stimulate certain steps along the way. But honestly, I think Amy's approach of this expansion contraction without external influences like AI as honestly a crutch at times could actually serve as an asset to you. And then if you wanted to leverage AI in certain ways, if you feel it's a good idea generating mechanism, great.
I think that,
The pot
yes,
pulls up.
the pot pull is up. Barrett, that was very well said. I think I am both considering with AI the fact that AI has often takes on a lot of people's creative work that is uncredited and then unacknowledged. So that the use of AI to generate ideas is often because AI has consumed the work of many people. So
Mm,
that's like a little bit of an ethical consideration with the use of AI.
yes.
Um, and then additionally, if you were to use AI, because it is very much a tool out there, so and is a very possible and potentially very useful tool, um, is to try to insert it into this process. So you still have your kind of expand and refine phase, and your
Mhm.
AI can be a boosting tool for some of those stages, usually the expansion stages, um, and could be one potential way of generating more um, possibilities.
Well, with the
Yeah,
pot poll, not including the additional logos that you selected, but your
yeah,
logos, that wins the day. So I'm going to share, as you'll see, share more participant logos
great.
that we could walk through. Okay, I'm going to pull that up right now. Share my desktop and go to this one. Kill this. And well, let's pick a few. Protects game dice. Represents me selling bags to contain these.
Ah,
Interesting.
cool.
So I can see the
Mhm.
multi-sided die as being um, in the final stage, being potentially quite recognizable.
I can see this having a lot of possibilities for simplification, which
Mhm.
might be the advice I would give to everybody at this stage, is thinking of different ways to simplify your designs. Um, and I think you could easily communicate this in a very simple way. Like the cat could be a silhouette with eyes. Its pose could be, perhaps you could start to think about the overall shape that that cat makes, especially if it's selling bags. If you're selling bags that contain, I could almost
Mm.
imagine that slightly bag silhouette, because cats often do make that shape with their bodies, with that dice, and then perhaps just a few features that show that it's kind of wrapped um, around the
I was
dice.
tempted to make the eyes dice.
Well, that could that could be another direction. So if you're expanding again from this, you could go there as well. I would love, we can start looking at another example too. I think once you are past this stage, it is also time to start thinking about what aesthetically you're conveying. So for example, that cat around the dice, you could use a silhouette, but you could also start to think of questions like, what is the aesthetic I want to evoke?
Mm.
Maybe it's like a block print aesthetic. Like maybe I like that kind of like hip, like almost like wood block simple screen print aesthetic. And so it's like a cutout negative shape. Maybe I want to evoke like a seal or like a wax seal or like a house seal or something like that. Those are things to think about.
This is a really interesting image, and I see a lot of possibilities here, especially depending on what the focus is, what the intent is. Is this a personal versus a professional versus a lab versus what is this? Because the eye can be used in many different ways to send many different messages. Is the logo associated with vision at all? Is that central component planet Earth? So I think we need to know more to really discuss efficacy or
And
applicability.
for all of you, the feedback that I'm giving you right now is with little, very little information. And
Mhm.
I think if we were actually undergoing like trying to give you like very personalized feedback, there would be a lot more questions about what your logo is doing. So if you hear me say something and you're like, but that's not my idea, or that's not what this is used for, like disregard.
That's right. Exactly. Oh, angel, sperm donors. Oh, intriguing.
Very
I'm
intriguing.
guessing it's going to be like this.
Okay. So for this one, this is an interesting, you asked a friend for a topic. Wonderful. So a friend generated this topic for you. I see with this person in the center that you're evoking a strong man, I am presuming, as well as like these ideas of the sperm and the DNA, the genetic material. If this was, I don't know if this is a real logo that you are designing for a real sperm donor company, but if you have a business like this or a service like this, I think this is very interesting because now you're running up on a lot of people's preconceptions. Like, what are people going to think when they think about a sperm donor company? What do they want out of a sperm donor company? What do you need to reassure people about a sperm donor company? And that your logo will address those concerns as well. So that if you know that people might be concerned about like the credibility of this, which they might very well be. They'd be like, how do I know that I can trust this company with a very big, like, maybe the creation of my child? What are you going to, how are you going to convey that kind of credibility in your logo? There might be some stigma against sperm donation or people who are seeking sperm donation. Or is there a way you can counteract that or actively reassure with the way you're presenting your logo?
And
Also, who's your audience? Who's coming for sperm donations? How can you make your logo appealing to that group of people in particular?
I would ditch all the details in here to
Mhm.
simplify greatly, and maybe take the literal advantage of using angel wings at some point on this sperm, for example. You could play with ideas like that.
You might not, but I might lean on the angel over the sperm for this logo because I
Yeah,
think the image of a sperm is evocative of many things and is not
yes.
always the most appealing image in itself. So you might lean away from the literal and more towards representing the feeling. Um,
I'd agree with that, yeah. Let's see what others. Do you have one
I
you'd
just
like to
wanted to
pick?
mention that we should start wrapping up. So maybe like one
all
or two,
right.
and then we should really close out because people will be upset they're missing out on all the
Right.
comments because they have
Do you
to
have
leave.
do you have one final one you'd like for me to pick,
Uh,
Amy, or should I just grab one?
no, I mean, I don't have time to pick and
This is
choose, so you might have to do it.
This is quite beautiful, the Quispy with the E. coli or other bacterium here. Let's pick how about this one?
Science, art, and illustration, data visualization.
Okay.
Cool. So this is using a bell curve, yeah? That's the kind of
Or
curve that's
is it
existing.
an anthill or a termite mound?
Yeah, perhaps that's the combination they're interested in using.
Oh, data visualization, right. Good point.
Because I'm seeing data and I'm also seeing an axis on that
Right.
anthill.
Good point.
Yeah. But I do like what Barrett has just pointed out as if there's anything beyond just superimposing an image of something that evokes nature over top of the bell curve, whether there's a way those things can integrate together.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, actually
so
what if you were to do something like the cross section, a beautiful silhouetted cross section of an ant nest or a termite mound with all the
within
galleries and the rest, and then you get enough of
which,
a
yeah,
hint with the axes that you're dealing with data visualization.
and that is kind of has a cool because you're taking an X-ray, which is itself about visualization and illumination. like pulling things out. And so I feel like that has potential. So that's like a initial thought, but I think you could maybe do a little bit more with that bell curve if you want to use it.
Love it. Thank you, everybody, for participating. And I deeply, profoundly thank Amy for joining us.
Thank you, Barrett. Thank you, organizers. And thanks for everybody for participating. I really appreciated the active participation and how engaged you guys have all been. It's been a pleasure.